Thank you for having me here, and thank you for inviting me to your community. I think it's a fitting topic to begin when we're talking about community. Obviously, my community is all the way back in Australia, so hopefully you guys will enjoy what I'm talking about, which is actually going to be on the topic of trust and the role that trust plays in actually building a community. And specifically, I'm going to be using a bunch of research that I've been working on since 2004. It's a proprietary model that looks at the psychology of trust and how trust forms in people and organizations and in communities as well. But instead of actually talking to begin with here, I thought I might actually start off with a little bit of an experiment. And I'm going to need your help with this. If I'd get you guys to look in your pockets, look at anything you've got, see if you've got a coin on you or a piece of small money. And what I want you to do is take that coin and turn to someone around you that you don't know and give them the coin and introduce yourself to them. See if you can do it quickly, because I'm on the clock. Okay. Hopefully you've all met someone new now. Okay. Now let me ask you a quick question. The most important question of all, who made a profit from that little exchange then? Well, okay, so for those of you that didn't earn a profit from that exchange, there's actually another reason, another benefit that you just got from that. And I'm going to draw your attention to a bit of research that was done by a guy called Professor Paul Zak from Claremont Graduate University in the States. And he's called a neuroeconomist. And he specifically looks at the neuroeconomics of trust and what happens with trust. And in his experiments, he's gotten people to exchange money, and then he's measured their brains and worked out what's actually happened afterwards. And he's found that when people send a trust signal proactively to another person, it induces a social obligation for that person to reciprocate that trust. So in this case, you gave someone money, it released oxytocin in their brain, and then caused them to be much more likely to trust you. And this is a really interesting finding and something that we've been looking at on a broader perspective with trust in communities, in brands, in organizations, which is what are these trust signals that we can send to other people? And we found actually 6 trust signals, trust drivers that drive trust with each other, with communities, with organizations, with people, with political leaders. And what I'm going to share with you today is some really hot off the press research from here in Canada. We did research with 1,500 people across Canada. We finished the research this week, and it looks at trust in the communities here in Vancouver, in Toronto, and in Montreal, and in some of the biggest organizations and groups and leaders in those communities. So I'm going to share that with you here today. And there's 3 things I'm going to share. Firstly, why should we try and build trust in a community? Secondly, what the 6 psychological drivers of trust are. And thirdly, I'm going to give you some of those metrics and actually show you some of the things that we've tested and some of the trust in those things. So, firstly, why? Why should we try and build trust inside a community? Well, here's one of the first reasons. When people trust their community and trust the people in their community, 85% of them are going to recommend it to other people. So you think about tourism, you think about trying to attract more people into a great city here like Vancouver. That happens when people in this city trust it. When they trust this community, they talk about it, they recommend it. And recommendation is one of the best ways to convince people to do something else. So again, firstly, recommendation. When people trust their community, they recommend it. Second thing, when people trust their community, they actually help out each other. They help out their neighbours. So when it comes to trying to help someone across the road, like this guy here, or help out the person next to you, then again, when you trust the community, when you trust the people around you, you're much more likely to help them out and to go out of your way to help them out. Another one, I guess this is a good one for Jim Chu, who was in here previously, but again, when people trust their community, they're much more likely to report a crime. So when they see something going on out there, when something is going wrong and they believe that someone's getting hurt or harmed, they're much more likely to pick up the phone and report that crime, or get online, as we saw with those Vancouver riots, and actually report what was going on, because they trust their community, they trust the people around them. Another one, again, a big problem inside Western societies is the lack of voter turnout and the fact that year after year we see less and less people turning out to actually vote and become part of their political institutions. And what we see, again, from community trust is that when people trust their community and the people around them, 73% are willing to vote in elections. And that number is significantly higher than the voting turnouts you see in countries like the US, Canada, and Australia, which perhaps that says something about the level of trust in our communities. And lastly, but not leastly, obviously, is volunteering. When people trust their community, they're much more willing to volunteer. They're also much more willing to donate money to charity, 49% there. but 54% will donate their time to volunteer in their community and do great things and spread change. So trust has incredibly powerful benefits to a community. In fact, you could call it the core of the community, or the oil that runs through a community and keeps it moving. Without the trust, communities seize up, groups seize up, and all of these benefits that you're seeing here, talking to each other, helping each other out, being willing to volunteer, start to disappear. So then, how do we actually measure this trust, and what are the drivers of trust? What are the psychological things that cause trust to occur? So this is the next part of this research here, and it draws on a proprietary model that's used morphological psychology. Big word, but it's actually a German theory of psychology that looks at tensions in human behavior. And there's 3 tensions we've found, which equals 6 drivers. And all of these tensions work together to define trust in communities, in organizations, in people. And I'm going to take you through those drivers, but I'm going to need a little bit of help as we're going through. So, first one, have any of you guys been involved in networking or in a community event where you're talking to new people and meeting new people? Put up your hand. Great, lots of you. What are some of the first things that you talk about when you meet a new person? Throw them out, yell them out. Sorry, names? What do you do? Where are you from? Maybe where you go to school, like here at SFU. These are all examples of the first driver of trust, and that is stability. People want to know the history, the foundation, where you're from, where did you go to school, where did you grow up, how old are you? All of these things are the first things that build trust inside a community or with one another. In fact, you could kind of think of them like, we're like dogs. We like to think that we're so much more advanced than animals, but we're not. We sniff each other's butts when we first meet each other. And we want to find out, what is this person's stability? What are they about? And that's that first driver there. It's like laying down the foundation of a relationship. However, there's also an opposite, which is that, yeah, stability is great, history is great, but if you're not moving forward, if you're not trying new things, if you're not doing new things, people get bored of you. So you have to stay relevant, you have to stay up to date. Second driver of trust, innovation. If you're not moving forward, if you're not trying new things, if you're not bringing new ideas to the table, people lose interest in you. People lose interest in your brand, in your organization, in the community. So again, the foundation is great, but what are you doing on that foundation? How are you moving forward? If you don't have this, you won't be trusted. Think of like Uncle Rico in Napoleon Dynamite, constantly talking about the history and the past. So boring. What are you doing today? Next one. Who in the room's a mother? Put up your hand. A father? Put up your hand as well. What about a student? Put up your hand there. A lover? Another hand. Lots of different people in the room there. Lots of different relationships that you have here with different sorts of people. Again, that's the next main driver of trust, is a relationship. You have to provide some sort of relationship. You know, what is the relationship you provide to these other people, or to the community, or to an organization? What is that relationship? And you have to be clear on that, otherwise people won't trust you. However, you think about yourself. Think about the relationships you have, the friends you have, and how often some of those friends get pruned off. You know, the phone occasionally loses a few friends. Facebook goes through a bit of a prune occasionally. The next driver of trust. Relationships great, but if you're not delivering practical value, people get rid of you. Those relationships start to die. So that second tension is the idea of you have to provide a relationship, and those relationships have to deliver practical value, or people won't trust you. Last tension and last 2 drivers. Values. Values are such an important part of who we are and who we choose to engage with. And it's the same thing for organizations and people and brands. And that's exactly what this next driver is vision. Vision is the 5th driver of trust. What are you promising? What's the big picture? Where are you heading? And how are you going to excite me? What values do you stand for? If you don't have that, then people lose interest in you very quickly. So having values and vision is a very important next part of trust. However, and I'm sure you've experienced this, who's got a relative or a friend that's always coming up with new ideas and constantly coming up with new schemes and plans? Pop your hand. How often do those schemes come to reality? And how do you feel about those people as a result? And this is the next driver of trust. Vision's great, big pictures, ideas, excitement, but have you got the competence to back it up? Is it all just words and fluff and schemes, or are you actually going to roll up your sleeves, screw in that light bulb and make it happen? So that's the 6th driver of trust. And it's interesting though, you don't need to trust me with this research. Trust the data, because every single one of these drivers of trust work in unison together to create trust in a community, in individuals, in organizations. And every single one of them is equally correlated to overall trust. So if I said, do you trust X organization? And I then measured it against all of these factors here, these are what lead to overall trust. You can see there between 0.5 and 0.6% in every single instance, which means that no one of these holds the key. You could have 100 years of history, but if you're not moving forward, it means nothing. You could have the biggest vision in the world, but if you don't have competence, it means nothing. You could be the best buddy in the world, but if you're not delivering value, it means nothing. Because all of these drivers of trust work together. And it's only once they work together that you have true trust. So, how can we measure trust in this community? I'm going to give you a few measures from the latest study that we just finished and show you a few little interesting brands and organizations. So, who remembers this? Jim Chu was just talking about it, the riots in Vancouver and what occurred there. And I mean, it was a major moment inside our community. It tore at the fabric of our community. But how have some of the organizations and people that were involved in this process come out in the back end? So let's look at the first one. Here we have the Vancouver Police Department versus the Toronto Police Department and their level of trust on every single one of these trust drivers. So on these drivers here, if you look at them, in the middle would be 0 level of trust in each of those drivers, and as you move further and further out, you have more and more strength in vision and competence and innovation. And so what you can see here is that on every single one of these factors and every single one of these drivers, the Vancouver Police Department is lagging behind their counterparts in Toronto. In fact, it's almost identical again to how they're lagging behind the police department in Montreal as well. And so essentially what this data is showing is that these trust drivers are lower on every single factor, and then overall their level of trust is almost 1 point lower than Toronto as well. And the willingness of the people in this community in Vancouver to recommend the Vancouver Police Department to other people is also lower. So you can see clearly here these trust drivers lead to trust. And there's a major problem going on here for Vancouver Police Department. Police departments traditionally, their trust levels wouldn't fluctuate very much at all. The fact that they are as much lower as other communities across Canada is a major problem for them. And if you look at across here, you know, things like competence, do they deliver what they promise? What are their values? Are they moving forward? Have they got a good stability and foundation? They're all much lower. However, the hockey teams have done a little bit better. So the police department seems to have been affected by the riot, but the Canucks certainly haven't. So here you've got the Canucks versus the Toronto Maple Leafs, and it's almost the reverse. So here you see the Canucks are much stronger on all of these drivers than the Leafs. In fact, I think some of the interesting ones are competence. Do they actually do what they promise? And also innovation. Are they moving forward? Are they relevant for the future? Have they got a great lineup moving forward into the future? And so you can see here again the fans, when you're looking at people in Vancouver versus people in Toronto and you're asking them about how they feel about these teams. Again, their overall trust rating, the Canucks are much more trusted than the Leafs. And whether or not you'd refer it on to people you know, your friends and colleagues, again, much higher for the Canucks than for the Leafs. The last one, again, we've been talking a lot about social media here and the ability to use it to build community. I thought the last one would be interesting is looking at Facebook. And Facebook is getting a lot of press, obviously, with some of their privacy concerns and what's going on here. And it certainly seems to have fed through into people's perceptions here in Canada. Because when you look at these two things, the CBC, which is the stalwart, the tradition of media and broadcasting inside Canada, versus Facebook, you can see that Facebook is suffering a significant trust deficit in all of these attributes, except one. There's one up there where it's stronger, and that is innovation. So yes, it's still staying up to date and relevant. But when you look at some of the areas here, like practical value, is it useful to me? Vision, do they have the same values as me? Do they have values that I respect? There's issues here that people have with Facebook. And it would seem to indicate that there's some trust issues. And it's interesting, when we've looked at other organizations in the past, when they start to get numbers like this, it tends to predict behavior in the next few years, which means that people will tend to turn away from them. We did this study with Tim Hortons and Starbucks recently a few years ago. And we found just before Starbucks started to experience major problems here in Canada, their overall trust ranking was much lower as well. And so people turn away from organizations, brands, things in the community when they don't trust them. And it's interesting to see what's going to happen with Facebook moving forward. So that was the psychology of trust in your community and some of the things that we measured there. And hopefully it will help you think about yourself and how you relate to other people. How do you harness these 6 drivers of trust when you're talking to other people around you? And what is the level of trust in the organizations and the groups that you're a part of as well? That's the psychology of trust, and hopefully you can go out there and use it. Thank you.